The Vatican claims to be the heart of holiness, but behind its marble walls, some popes ruled like tyrants cloaked in white. These weren't just flawed men. They were power-hungry, ruthless, and in some cases, deadly. Beneath the golden tiara once sat leaders who poisoned rivals, led armies into blood-soaked battles, and turned the church into a tool of fear. They weren't saints. They were sinners with crowns, and their secrets have been buried, until now. Leo X, the Pope who bankrupted the Church. Born Giovanni de' Medici, Pope Leo X embodied the excesses of the Renaissance papacy, indulgences that would ultimately spark the Protestant Reformation. The second son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, Leo was raised in splendor and brought those expectations with him when he was elected in 1513. His famous declaration, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it," perfectly captured his attitude toward the sacred office. Leo treated the papal treasury as his personal fortune, pouring vast sums into art, grand banquets, hunting expeditions, and magnificent architectural projects. He kept exotic animals like a white elephant named Hanno, hosted elaborate theatrical performances, and famously commissioned works from masters like Raphael, all at staggering cost. To fund his lavish lifestyle, Leo expanded the sale of indulgences and even created new church offices to sell to the highest bidder. By 1520, despite inheriting a full treasury, he had bankrupted the papacy, forcing the Vatican to pawn priceless relics and borrow heavily at crushing interest rates. Most significantly, Leo's aggressive sale of indulgences to fund the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica outraged a German monk, Martin Luther. Luther's 95 Theses would soon ignite the Protestant Reformation. When informed of Luther's uprising, Leo famously dismissed him as some drunken German who will amend his ways when he sobers up. By the time he realized the true threat, it was too late. Leo's financial recklessness and resistance to reform shattered the Church's authority, forever altering the course of European history. And this is just the beginning of our descent into the darkest chapters of Church history. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe for more ancient mysteries unveiled. Sergius III, the Pope of the Dark Century. The 10th century, the Saeculum Obscurum, or Dark Century, was a time when the papacy fell under the control of corrupt Roman noble families. At the center of it stood Pope Sergius III, who ruled from 904 to 911. Sergius seized the papal throne through violence, reportedly ordering the deaths of two predecessors, Pope Leo V and Antipope Christopher. Once in power, he allied himself with the powerful Roman noblewoman Marozia, launching an era known as the pornocracy, when the papacy became a puppet of aristocratic families. Sergius and Marozia are said to have had an illegitimate son, who would later become Pope John XI, a chilling sign of how the papacy became dynastic rather than divine. Under Sergius, the Lateran Palace became infamous for lavish gatherings and moral decline. Important church positions were often granted based on wealth and loyalty rather than spiritual merit. He was particularly brutal toward rivals. Those loyal to Pope Formosus were stripped of power, and many faced harsh punishments under Sergius's rule. Some accounts suggest Sergius participated in secretive ceremonies blending unconventional beliefs with corrupted religious practices. While some reports may be exaggerated, they paint a portrait of a leader who abandoned any true spiritual guidance. Sergius II left a shattered legacy, a papacy dominated by political intrigue, corruption, and violence, causing damage that took centuries to heal. Stephen VI, the Pope of the Cadaver Synod. In the year 896, Pope Stephen VI conducted what must rank as one of the most macabre trials in human history, an event so bizarre it seems almost unbelievable. Stephen ordered the exhumation of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, who had been dead for 9 months. The decomposing corpse, still dressed in papal vestments, was propped up on a throne in the Basilica of St. John Lateran to stand trial in what became known as the Cadaver Synod. The dead pope was assigned a deacon to answer on his behalf as Stephen hurled accusations at the rotting body, charging Formosus with perjury and violating canon law. The proceedings were nothing short of theatrical madness. Stephen, in a rage, screamed questions at the corpse while yanking the papal robes from its decaying shoulders. After finding the deceased pontiff guilty, Stephen ordered the 3 fingers Formosus had used for blessings to be cut off. The body was then stripped of its sacred vestments, dressed in common clothes, and buried in a cemetery for foreigners. Not satisfied with this desecration, Stephen later ordered the corpse exhumed again beheaded, and thrown into the Tiber River. The grotesque spectacle revealed Stephen's profound psychological instability and obsessive hatred for his predecessor. But his macabre revenge had severe consequences. The Roman people, horrified by this desecration, soon rose against him. Within months, Stephen was overthrown, imprisoned, and ultimately strangled to death. The cadaver synod stands as perhaps the most bizarre episode in papal history, revealing how deeply the office could be corrupted by personal vendetta and mental instability. The incident was so shameful that the Church attempted to strike it from official records, yet it survives as a testament to how far a pope could descend from his spiritual calling. Pius XII, the Holocaust Pope. Among the more modern and controversial papal figures stands Eugenio Pacelli, who became Pope Pius XII in 1939, just months before the outbreak of World War II. Unlike the medieval popes whose crimes were often personal excesses or abuses of power, Pius has been condemned by many historians for something far more devastating: his silence in the face of genocide. As the Holocaust unfolded across Nazi-occupied Europe, Pius maintained a policy of diplomatic neutrality that many critics argue amounted to moral complicity. While 6 million Jews and millions of others were systematically murdered, the spiritual leader of European Christianity refused to issue any explicit condemnation of Nazi atrocities or the final solution. Pius had served as Vatican Secretary of State before his elevation to the papacy and had negotiated the Reich Concordat with Hitler in 1933. This agreement guaranteed the rights of the Catholic Church in Germany in exchange for the dissolution of Catholic political organizations that had opposed the Nazi rise to power. The Concordat effectively removed the last major institutional obstacle to Hitler's complete control, lending the Nazi regime a measure of legitimacy on the world stage. Once war began and reports of mass killings reached the Vatican, Pius calculated that public protest would only make matters worse for both Catholics and Jews. He opted instead for quiet diplomacy and limited humanitarian aid. When the Nazis rounded up 1,022 Roman Jews in October 1943, literally within sight of the Vatican windows, Pius did not publicly object to their deportation to Auschwitz, where most perished. Defenders of Pius argue that he worked behind the scenes to shelter Jews, with the Vatican itself hiding several hundred Jewish refugees. They point to Hitler's plans to kidnap the Pope and the precarious position of Catholics in Nazi-occupied territories as justification for his caution. Some Catholic institutions and individuals did indeed save thousands of Jewish lives during the Holocaust, often at great personal risk. But critics point to the stark contrast between Pius' willingness to condemn communism forcefully and his reluctance to specifically name Nazi crimes. In December 1942, when Allied governments issued a joint declaration condemning the extermination of the Jews, Pius' Christmas message spoke only vaguely of humanity being plunged into the gloom of error, discord, and conflict, without mentioning Jews, Nazis, or genocide. After the war, the Vatican even assisted in the escape of Nazi war criminals to South America through what became known as the Rat Lines, with high-ranking church officials providing falsified travel documents and safe passage for men who had orchestrated mass murder. The debate over Pius' legacy continues today, with some calling for his canonization while others label him Hitler's Pope. What remains undeniable is that when facing humanity's darkest hour, the man who claimed to be Christ's representative on earth chose institutional self-preservation over moral clarity, leaving an enduring stain on the modern papacy. If you're not familiar with these evil popes and you enjoy this video, please give us a like and subscribe. It would help us a lot. Let's continue, because what's coming next are the limits of human cruelty. Benedict IX, the Pope who sold the papacy. In the 11th century, at a time when the papacy had fallen under the control of powerful Roman families, the Ephylactus of Tusculum ascended to the papal throne as Benedict IX at the astonishingly young age of 20. His rise to power represented everything that was wrong with the Church during this dark period, as his family essentially purchased the papacy for their young relative through bribery and political maneuvering. What followed was one of the most disgraceful papal reigns in history. Benedict quickly revealed himself to be completely unfit for his holy office. Historical records describe him as a man consumed by depravity, indulging in every vice imaginable within the sacred walls of the papal palace. But it was not just his personal conduct that earned him his infamous reputation. In an act that shocked even the corruption-hardened clergy of his time, Benedict IX did something unprecedented. When he grew tired of his papal responsibilities, he decided to sell the papacy like a common marketplace commodity, In 1045, he negotiated with his godfather, John XII, who paid him a substantial sum to abdicate so that Gratian could take over as Pope Gregory VI. But Benedict's cynical dealings did not end there. After squandering his payment, he attempted to reclaim the papal throne through force. The chaos that followed resulted in 3 rival claimants to the papacy simultaneously, plunging the Church into one of its worst crises. Pope Victor III would later write of Benedict, "His life was so vile, so foul, so execrable, that I shudder to think of it." Even by the standards of his time, Benedict's blatant simony and complete disregard for the sanctity of his office made him a symbol of ecclesiastical corruption at its worst. John XII, the teenager who shattered the papacy's reputation. Before Benedict's scandalous reign, another young pope had already set a troubling precedent for papal corruption. In 955, Octavian of the powerful Tusculani family became Pope John XII at just 18 years of age. John's leadership brought chaos to the Lateran Palace, which, according to contemporary sources, became associated with frequent feasting, extravagance, and scandalous behavior. Chroniclers of the time accused him of maintaining questionable personal relationships and surrounding himself with controversial figures, sub-allegedly from his extended family. Various historical accounts also charged John with serious moral failings, including accusations of misconduct toward pilgrims and illicit affairs. These allegations, though partially recorded by church officials, must be viewed within the context of the highly political environment of medieval Rome. Beyond personal controversy, John's political blunders repeatedly placed Rome at risk. He misused church resources, betrayed key alliances, and even appointed unqualified individuals to high offices in exchange for financial gain. John's life came to an untimely end in 964 at the age of 27. Some reports suggest he died under violent circumstances following a private dispute, while others claim he suffered a sudden stroke. Whatever the cause, his passing reflected the turbulent and often reckless nature of his papacy. Boniface VIII, the pope who claimed to be God. At the height of papal power in the late 13th century, a lawyer named Benedict IX ascended to the papal throne as Boniface VIII. His 14-year reign from 1294 to 1303 would push papal claims to unprecedented extremes, while being marked by corruption, vindictiveness, and ultimately, humiliation. Boniface's rise to power was itself tainted by scandal. His predecessor, Celestine V, was a humble hermit who found himself unsuited for the papal office. After just 5 months, Celestine sought to resign, something no pope had done before. Many historians believe Boniface manipulated Celestine into this decision, and then, fearing a potential rival, imprisoned the former pope until his death 10 months later. Once secure in power, Boniface proved himself pathologically obsessed with expanding papal authority. In his infamous bull Unam Sanctum, issued in 1302, he proclaimed, "We declare, state, define and pronounce that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff." This was essentially a claim that the pope stood above all earthly rulers and that salvation itself depended on submission to papal authority. Boniface's personal conduct fell drastically short of his lofty spiritual claims. He accumulated enormous wealth through simony and nepotism, appointing family members to lucrative church positions and demanding payments for ecclesiastical offices. His ostentatious lifestyle and arrogance earned him widespread contempt even among the clergy. Contemporary accounts describe Boniface as cruel and vindictive toward opponents. When the powerful Colonna family questioned the legitimacy of his election, Boniface excommunicated the entire family, declared a crusade against them, and destroyed their ancestral city of Palestrina, killing thousands of civilians. The Pope ordered the city's complete demolition, with salt plowed into the earth to prevent anything from growing there again. Most notorious were Boniface's megalomaniacal statements about his own divinity. According to multiple witnesses, including cardinals who later testified under oath, Boniface repeatedly declared, "I am Caesar, I am Emperor, I am God on earth." On another occasion, he allegedly proclaimed, "To be at enmity with me is to be at enmity with God, for I am Pope, Vicar of Jesus Christ, and whoso is not with me is against God." His excessive claims eventually led to direct conflict with King Philip IV of France. When Philip arrested a French bishop for treason, Boniface issued the bull Ausculta Fili, asserting that the French king was subject to papal authority in temporal as well as spiritual matters. Philip responded by burning the papal bull publicly and calling for a general council to depose Boniface. The conflict culminated in the infamous outrage of Anagni in 1303. Philip's minister Guillaume de Nogaret led armed men into Boniface's palace at Anagni, capturing the 86-year-old pope. For 3 days, Boniface was beaten, threatened with execution, and allegedly even struck in the face with a gauntlet. The pope who had claimed to be God was found cowering and alone, expecting death at any moment. Though local citizens eventually rescued him, Boniface never recovered from the trauma. He died a month later, his grand claims to universal dominion shattered by the reality of his powerlessness when faced with determined secular opposition. Boniface's papacy represents the dangers of theocratic ambition, unrestrained by either ethical boundaries or practical political realities. His reign marked the beginning of the decline of papal political power in Europe, proving that even the most grandiose claims of divine authority could not protect a corrupt and overreaching pope from the consequences of his actions. Urban II, the architect of holy slaughter. Pope Urban II presents a different kind of evil from the sexually depraved popes we have discussed. A brilliant intellectual and skilled politician, Urban appeared outwardly as a model reformer who might restore dignity to the papacy. However, he would become responsible for one of history's bloodiest religious campaigns. In 1095, at the Council of Clermont, Urban delivered a speech that would change the course of history. Responding to Byzantine Emperor Alexios' request for mercenaries to fight the Seljuk Turks, Urban instead called for a massive armed pilgrimage to recapture Jerusalem from Muslim control. His rhetoric was deliberately inflammatory, painting Muslims as a barbaric race who had desecrated holy places and tortured Christians. Under the battle cry of Deus Vult, or God wills it, Urban sparked the First Crusade, unleashing unprecedented religious violence across Europe and the Middle East. The consequences were catastrophic. Before the main Crusader armies even departed for Jerusalem, groups of zealous peasants led by charismatic preachers began massacring Jewish communities throughout the Rhineland, in what historians now recognize as the first major European pogroms. Urban did little to prevent these atrocities. When the Crusaders finally reached Jerusalem in July 1099, they perpetrated one of the most horrific massacres of the medieval period. Contemporary accounts describe streets flowing with blood as Crusaders slaughtered Muslim and Jewish residents indiscriminately. Men, women, and children were put to the sword, with some Crusader accounts boasting that the blood reached their ankles. One Crusader wrote, "The slaughter was so great that our men waded in blood up to their ankles." Estimates suggest that between 70,000 and 100,000 people died in the Jerusalem massacre alone, with the total death toll from the First Crusade possibly reaching nearly 1 million. What makes Urban's actions particularly disturbing was their calculated nature. Historical evidence suggests he knew precisely what unleashing religious fervor would do, using the crusade as a means to expand papal power over secular rulers and unify the fractured Christian West under his authority. The bloodbath was not an unfortunate byproduct of his policy, but an integral part of his political strategy. Innocent III, the Pope who drowned Europe in blood. While Urban launched the crusading movement, it was Pope Innocent III who truly perfected the use of holy war as a political weapon. Serving from 1198 to 1216, Innocent is often celebrated by traditional church historians as a brilliant legal mind who strengthened papal authority. However, his methods revealed a ruthless disregard for human life when it came to those he deemed heretics. Under Innocent's direction, the Fourth Crusade was diverted from its intended target of Egypt to attack the Christian city of Constantinople in 1204. The Crusaders sacked the greatest Christian city of the medieval world, desecrating churches, looting priceless relics, and committing atrocities against the population. Although initially shocked, Pope Innocent II eventually accepted the outcome, recognizing that it expanded Latin Christian influence. Even more devastating was Innocent's launch of the Albigensian Crusade against the Cathar heretics in southern France. According to later accounts, when asked how to distinguish heretics from faithful Catholics in the city of Béziers, Papal Legate Arnaud Amalric allegedly replied, "Kill them all. God will know his own." The campaign that followed led to widespread slaughter. Entire towns were decimated, and the once flourishing region of Languedoc was left devastated. At Minerve, chroniclers report that around 140 Cathars who refused to renounce their faith were executed by burning, the largest mass execution of its kind in medieval Europe to that time. Innocent II also formalized the medieval Inquisition and implemented severe restrictions against Jewish communities, including decrees that required them to wear identifying badges, an ominous precedent that would echo tragically in later history. His Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 mandated these practices across Christendom. By the time of his death, Innocent had expanded papal power to its zenith, but at an immense human cost. The doctrines he established for combating heresy laid the foundations for centuries of religious persecution. But the worst pope of all was yet to come. Prepare yourself. What you are about to hear may be deeply unsettling. Before we continue, please subscribe and leave us a like. Now let's reveal the most infamous pope in history. Alexander VI. Few papal names inspire such immediate notoriety as Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia. His papacy from 1492 to 1503 epitomized the corruption and excesses of the Renaissance era. Borgia secured his election through heavy political maneuvering, substantial financial incentives, and alliances, ensuring his rise to the highest office. Once enthroned, he transformed the Vatican into a center for advancing his family's wealth and influence. Alexander appointed numerous relatives, including his children, to powerful church positions, accumulating vast riches through favoritism and questionable dealings. Before ascending to the papacy, Alexander fathered several children, most notably Caesar and Lucrezia Borgia, whom he openly favored. Contemporary rumors, widely circulated even among his supporters, alleged inappropriate relationships within the family, though modern historians continue to debate the veracity of these claims. The Borgias were notorious for their ruthless methods. Allegations of the strategic use of poisons against political enemies became part of their legend. Some accounts even describe fabricated charges against wealthy families, leading to their downfall and the confiscation of their fortunes. One of the more infamous episodes linked to Alexander VI is the so-called Ballet of Chestnuts, a lavish banquet where participants allegedly engaged in scandalous behavior. Though details vary and are often colored by the chronicler's hostility, these tales further cemented Alexander's reputation for moral laxity. During his reign, the Vatican became synonymous with intrigue, corruption, and scandal. When Alexander died in 1503, reportedly from illness, rumors swirled that poison may have played a role. His death was greeted by many Romans not with mourning, but with celebration. Despite the darkness of these chapters, the Church endured, bloody but unbroken. Scandal and sanctity have often walked hand in hand through history. And now, with the passing of Pope Francis and whispers of prophecy stirring again, the question arises, are we merely witnessing history repeating itself, or the final act of a much older and darker script? For a deeper look into these mysteries, check out our recent video exploring Nostradamus' chilling predictions about the fate of the papacy.